All right, so here's my crowd. Just making sure you see them. Know that people are actually watching me give this speech. And all right, so the post-processing. So my speech starts now. My name's Chris. I'm here to talk to you today about gun control in America and how it doesn't really work. So I want to start off talking about. About a topic that kind of hits home with everybody, the shootings in Newtown, Connecticut. Adam Lanza killed 20 children, 6 adult faculty members, his mother, and himself with an AR-15. Well, it's debated whether he used an AR-15 or a 9mm, but long story short is he killed some people with a gun. And that's just the most recent of many school shootings. A few more that you might have heard of are the Columbine tragedy. That happened April 20th, 1999, where Eric Harris and Dylan Kobold, can't pronounce his last name, saved my life. He killed 12 students, 1 teacher, and they both killed themselves. There were also 24 students who were injured by gunfire and other things. And then also there was the Virginia Tech tragedy. That happened on April 16th, 2007, and that was Sung Hoi Cho. He killed 32 people and wounded 17 others with gunfire. And the weird thing about that case, he shot them all in the head, and they all had multiple gunshot wounds. So he shot most of them 4 times. Apparently one in the head wasn't enough. So just want to read my thesis statement verbatim, because that's what I'm supposed to do. Because the effectiveness of gun control in America today is a topic that's generally unknown by the public at large, it's important to look at how and why gun control has proven to be ineffective. Major laws enacted to control guns, and an example of the statistics to show the crime rate as compared to gun control legislation enactment. So, how and why gun control has proven to be ineffective? Think about how easy it is to get a gun. As an American, it's pretty easy. You go into the store, you give them your background information, you wait a few minutes, and they sell you a gun. Well, as a criminal, it's even easier. You just call your buddy who knows a guy, and you give them some money, and they give you a gun. All these laws that have been in place have only served to hinder responsible gun owners, people who actually abide by the law. People who don't abide by the law don't care. It doesn't matter how hard it is to get a gun for them because they're going to get one. Mexico, Canada, Belize, South America, there's a million places to get a gun. But the point being is, most legislation has been aimed at responsible gun owners who aren't the people who should be punished here. Also, they're unable to carry on schools or federal property. So, in addition to limiting access to guns, you're also limiting the public's access to defend themselves. These 3 big shootings are the biggest of the ones that have happened over the past 20 years. But the fact being is they represent a small percentage of the actual number of shooting incidents, not just on schools, all around the world, really. Well, not around the country. And by forcing the public to be disarmed, you're just promoting crime. And I have an example of that later. Now I want to talk a little bit about gun control laws that were put into place. The first one I want to talk about is the Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act of 1994. Basically, the big idea behind the Brady Act is that it required a background check for all firearms purchases. Previous to the Brady Act, there was no background check. You walked in, I've got $50, I want a gun. Now, I don't know if it's $50, but get the idea. Also, another thing that it did that was very controversial, that background check rule doesn't apply to person-to-person transfers. So if I go to a gun show, pretty much all I have to do is hand some guy some money and he'll give me a gun, and that's all that there is, and that's still the way it is today. It also doesn't cover gifting of guns. So if my granddad owned a .45 and he gifted it to me, he doesn't care if I'm mentally defective or something like that. He doesn't care if I'm a felon or a fugitive from justice. He just gives it to me, and that's his legal right. It also established something called a straw purchase. A straw purchase is where you're not able to buy a gun, but I am. So I go to a gun store and buy a gun and give it to you. And basically, I'm purchasing it knowing that you can't get it, but I'm going to give it to you. So I'm kind of circumventing the rules. And that established that as a felony. Another big gun control act was the Firearms Owners Protection Act of 1986. And the big heavy hitter here was that it made automatic weapons illegal after the date of its inception. So prior to its inception, every fully automatic weapon was legal. You could go to the corner gun shop, if they had those, and you could buy an automatic weapon. One thing it also provided for was, I guess, grandfathering in all the old automatic weapons. So if you bought an automatic weapon prior to its inception, you could keep it, or you could sell it on the private market. It attached a lot of rules to that, but the long story short is there's still fully automatic weapons on the market. They're just really hard to get your hands on now. So that actually did something good. I can't tell you how much. One topic I wanted to cover here, in North Dakota, there's a very odd system in place. And I guess this only really applies here, but in North Dakota, you only have to be 18 to own a handgun. However, you have to be 21 to purchase a handgun. That makes sense to anybody else? It doesn't make sense to me. Another thing that the Firearms Owners Protection Act enabled was traveling from a gun-friendly state to another gun-friendly state through a gun-unfriendly state. So before, if I was traveling from, say, Virginia to California, well, not California because they're not gun-friendly, let's say Nevada. Let's say if I'm going from Virginia to Nevada and I need to pass through Illinois, which everyone hates because they have terrible gun control laws. So before this act, if I were to drive through Illinois, I could be pulled over and arrested for a felony. But now, as long as I keep my gun locked and in a locked container, then I'm able to go wherever I want. As long as my end point and my beginning point, where I actually have possession of my firearm, is gun friendly and not be subject to any bad publicity, I guess you could call it. It also clarified the prohibited persons restrictions, so who's not allowed to buy a gun at a gun show. And I'm just going to read these verbatim because there's way too many to memorize. The mentally ill, anyone charged with a crime of domestic violence, felons, unlawful users or dealers of controlled substances, and people who have had orders of protection filed against them. Also, anyone who's been dishonorably discharged from the military. And dishonorable discharges cover a lot of things, but it's just another one to tack on there. Now I want to talk to you about a few examples, and I'm pretty much reading all these verbatim because there's a lot of numbers and I can't really memorize them all. The one thing I want to harp on is the DC handgun ban. It's the easiest thing to look up statistics for, and it's pretty easy to see that it was a terrible failure. Gun ownership actually decreased during the time of the ban, and the time I'm looking at here is from 1976 when the bill was incepted to 1991 when well, pretty much the first real results of its passage were available. So in 15 years, gun ownership decreased, and that was directly related to the fact that the bill prohibited anyone other than law enforcement officers from carrying a firearm in the city. Residents were even barred from keeping guns in their homes for self-defense. And I think that goes a little bit beyond the Second Amendment, and the Supreme Court eventually said that too. But crime had also been shown to increase, and that was because emboldened criminals knew that law-abiding citizens in the District of Columbia had absolutely no way to defend themselves. It was illegal to have a gun. If you had a gun, it had to be trigger-locked. Even if you were being shot at, you couldn't return fire. Even if you were being mugged, you couldn't take your trigger lock off, or you'd be violating the law. The homicide rate increased 200% between 76 and 91, and it was up to 369 in 1988, from 188 in 1976 when the ban started. By 93, annual homicides had reached 454. It's 454 people. Washington, D.C. isn't very big. You could fit like 100 of them maybe in North Dakota. That's a lot of people per capita. The national homicide rate actually dropped 12% over the same period. So it dropped from 1 in every 11,576 to 1 in every 10,291. So it shows you directly that this bill didn't work. It shows you directly that the homicide rate in D.C. increased while the national homicide rate decreased. And that's a pretty direct indicator that it didn't work. In conclusion, I've told you about how and why gun control has proven to be ineffective. I've told you about major laws that were put into place revolving around gun control. And I've given you an example of the statistics of a failed gun control bill. And in conclusion, I want to leave you with the words of two people. One was a mighty dictator who ruled his regime all the way until he committed suicide when the Allies were about to kill him, and the other from a leader in the forefront of peace. So, on April 11th, 1942, Adolf Hitler said, "The most foolish mistake we could possibly make would be to allow the subject races to possess arms. History shows that all conquerors who have allowed their subject races to carry arms have prepared for their own downfall by so doing. Indeed, I would go so far as to say that the supply of arms to the underdogs is a sine qua non for the overthrow of any sovereignty." Sorry, I'm not very good at other languages. What he was saying there is, if you have any knowledge of World War II, he disarmed his people, and that allowed him to rule with an iron fist. Whatever he said was law. The people had no opportunity to revolt. The people had no opportunity to speak up for their rights. It's a big thing in America. We do. If you do something we don't like, we have the ability and the opportunity to revolt against you. Look at 1776 when we gained our independence from the British. And the next one is from the Dalai Lama. On May 15th, 2001, the Dalai Lama was quoted as saying, "If someone has a gun and is trying to kill you, it would be reasonable to shoot back with your own gun." It seems odd that a leader of, preaching peace on earth would say something like that. But even he realizes that if force is being used against you, you need to use force back. So, I thank you for coming to my presentation. That's pretty much all my speech has got. Hope I swayed your opinion just a little bit, even though I was just trying to inform you about gun control and how it's failed in our country. So thanks. Ooh, 11 minutes. I was only over by 7.